the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, ancient cartographers discover that the big waterfall at the end of the world plunges into a sea of upturned swords. Ouch! Collapsible planets and dragon-breathing fire. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We have a roundtable discussion this time with editors and authors of the great new Ring of Fire alternate history anthology, Grantville Gazette 9. We are joined by Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, so stay tuned for that. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, I want to call your attention to our very cool Baen Books Teacher's Guides by offering an ebook sale this month. Baen Teacher Guides are developed by teachers and education experts for use by homeschoolers and teachers in the classroom. All Baen Teacher Guides provide a background of the novel, a complete and comprehensive summation of the story, a vocabulary list, individual chapter summaries, focus questions, and initiating activities, and reading comprehension quizzes, thought-provoking discussion questions, and lots more. These are amazing resources, in other words, for amazing books, and they are downloadable free at baen.com/study guides. And now for July, we offer $1 off all the Baen ebooks that have a teacher guide that goes along with them. These include great books like 1632 by Eric Flint, Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia, A Beautiful Friendship by David Weber, and some great hindlines such as The Star Beast, Farmer in the Sky, and The Rolling Stones. Stock up for education, for entertainment, or both, and check out the Baen Teacher Guides. They're a wonderful resource for everyone. And you can find the complete list of teacher guides and discount ebooks at Baen.com. Hey, the July mass market paperbacks are blasting across the sky for your reading enjoyment this month. Out now is Destroyer of Worlds by Larry Correia. Ashok Vidal, once a remorseless and highly effective protector of the law, is now the reluctant military commander of a throng of rebels and misfits and turncoat to a treacherous empire bent on the mass murder of an entire caste of people. If it's war the capital wants, it's war they will have with Ashok Vidal, for he has faced down gods and demons before and overcome them. Also out in July in mass market paperback is At the End of the World by Charles E. Gadden. 6 teenagers bound on a senior summer cruise ranging from suburban geeks to street-smart pariahs and a British captain who rarely smiles. What could go wrong? Well, zombies could go wrong. Just days after they leave, a plague starts spreading like wildfire, turning its survivors into cannibalistic monsters. Now the small ship they sail on becomes their one hope for survival. Also out in July is The Collapsium by Will McCarthy. When a ruthless saboteur attacks a device capable of probing the farthest reaches of space-time, 2 rival scientists must combine their prodigious intellects to prevent the destruction of the entire solar system and every living thing within it. The Collapsium by Will McCarthy. At the End of the World by Charles E. Gannon. Destroyer of Worlds by Larry Correia are now available at booksellers everywhere. This is part 1 of a 2-part roundtable discussion of Grantville Gazette 9. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. I want to welcome Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, or is it Lopatin? Lopatin to the podcast. Hello, folks.
How you doing?
Hi.
Let me talk a little bit about both of you, although I might need Jackie to fill me in on her background, or someone else too. Eric Flint, modern master of alternate history fiction, 3 million books in print. He's the author and creator of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with 1632, which came out in 2000, and it has, and this is where it's resulted 21 years later. He's written 6 popular novels with David Drake, the Belisarius novels, and with David Weber, he's written those Crown of Slave novels that are set in the Honorverse book. And there's a new one in process right now that's going to come out in the fall. It's going to be great. And what else we got? Eric was for many years a labor union activist, and he lives outside in the huffing, puffing East Chicago area where all the steel mills are or used to be. Walt, what's that? Still there?
They're still here.
Yeah, hold on a second. I've got a spam.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Walt Boyes is the editor of the Industrial Automation Insider magazine, editor of the Grantville Gazette, which is the community electronic magazine of, I guess you would call it, of the 1632.org. I don't know what the organization's called. Everybody that has to do with Eric's wonderful Ring of Fire series.
Community, it's the best term, probably.
Yeah.
Eric's Minions. Let's just go
Eric's
with that.
Minions. And along with Joy Ward.
My video isn't on.
Yeah.
Some of them are very definitely not minions.
You're not moving.
Some.
So, Joy Ward, author of a novel. She has several stories in print and magazines and anthologies, and she's the co-editor of the Grantville Gazette. She's written for many publications, including Mother Jones on the Issues, Commerce, and Government Review. Griff Barber, he spent his youth in 4 different countries, learned 3 languages, burning all his bridges in the process, finally ending up in Northern California with a day job as a police officer in a major metropolitan department, where he lives with his lovely wife and crazy smart daughter and some animals. He is the author, with Eric Flint, of 1636 Mission to the Mughals, or Mughals, and 1637 The Peacock Throne, which are India area before it was India based 1632 alternate history novels. There's Walt.
There we go.
Excellent.
There we go.
Excellent. So
That'll teach me to upgrade Zoom just before a meeting.
well, out now at booksellers. Yeah.
What
out
was
now.
that, Eric?
Go ahead. Let me show you the book. Out now at booksellers everywhere. Here's the 3D version of Grantville Gazette.
Right, look at that. It's a book.
Yes, it's a book. You can see from all sides. Or else I've done an incredibly good 3D mock-up, which I have not. This is the book.
It's right on special effects, Tony.
That's right. We just, it's cheaper just to print the books. So they are, they're out when this broadcast, they're not quite out as we speak, but they will be out as soon as this podcast is out as well. So maybe, Eric, you wrote an introduction to this. Maybe you or Walter Joy can bring us up to speed on what this is and what this project, the Grantville Gazette project, has wrought.
Well, the magazine started 2003, as I remember. What happened was that the 3rd book we did in the 1632 series was the anthology Ring of Fire. And this was very unusual because normally with a series, they don't produce an anthology that quickly. They wait till half a dozen novels are out, and then if there's enough popularity, then they'll produce a anthology. And when they do, the stories are always always done on commission. In other words, they're not accepting unsolicited manuscripts. The editor asked specific authors to write stories for it. But we had a lot of fan participation in building for 1632, and it continued on after the book came out. So I raised with Jim doing an anthology, and we would set aside half the book for established authors like David Weber, Mercedes Lackey. But the other half we would leave open for fans who wanted to submit stories, and we would pick them. And over 100 people submitted stories, and I wound up selecting 9 of them, and they appeared in that anthology. And it was very successful. That anthology has sold that over $100,000 in royalties, and anybody who knows anything about that's phenomenal and royalties for any short story anthology. And people kept writing. I mean, there's just a lot of fan fiction being produced. And so I raised with Jim, he said, hey, would you like to try the experiment of producing an electronic magazine where we would publish the best of these stories? And Jim thought it was an interesting idea, but he said he just didn't want to deal with the headache and hassle of running a magazine. So he said, but if you want, I'll lend you the money, enough to set it up, and then, you just pay me back. And that's how we did it. And actually, I was able to pay him back quite quickly. So the magazine, therefore, had been mine from the very beginning. And the first 4 issues of it, we did just kind of on the first 9 issues. There was no regular publication schedule. And we did pay people for it, but it was semi-pro rates. It was kind of an occasional, kind of a hobbyist thing. But eventually we decided, now let's take this thing seriously. And so beginning in May of 2007, we began producing it on a professional basis. It has a regular publication schedule, comes out every 2 months. The rates paid to the authors fit the Science Fiction Writers Association criteria for professional rates. It's a pro magazine. And I asked Paula Goodlett to be the editor of it, which she was for a number of years. And then she was later replaced by Walt. So the magazine, beginning with, I believe it was the 10th issue in May of 2007, has been published professionally, and we are now almost, where are we at, Walt? I think we're at issue 90.
We just put 96 to bed.
Right. So we're getting close to 100 issues. And what I then did, I discussed with Jim, and Jim said, well, let's try putting one of these issues of the magazine out as a book, see what happens. So we did. The first one is done as a paperback, and it's sold extremely well. And so we then did the next 3 the same way. We just take the existing issue of the magazine and just turn it into a book. And we did that with volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Grantville Gazette anthologies, which are published by Baen. But at that point, we could no longer do that because the magazine was just outracing, any possibility of any publisher keeping up with it. So since starting with volume 5, we have done each one of these volumes. They're best of. Basically, we go through about 15 issues of a magazine and select what we think are the best stories out of it. And then Baen Books publishes it as an anthology.
About how many, Walt and Joy, why don't you, what goes into making a magazine issue, and how do you do that? And about how many stories or articles? I think you have some nonfiction in there as well.
Yeah, the Gazette is broken up into several different departments, like most magazines are. The fiction department is for fiction that is in the 1632 series. We have a time spike department for fiction from Eric's other universe, the Time Spike universe. And we have a really good time spike story in this one, in the current one. It's called The First Cavalry of the Cretaceous. So it's kind of cool. Then we have a nonfiction department. There are a couple of places for columns. Christine Catherine Rush and I write columns. And then we have another department, which we call the Universe Annex. When Eric started Baen's Universe magazine, we always left it open for people who wanted to write, but who had no writing credentials. We would look at, and Rick Boatwright and a couple of other very savvy people put together an electronic slush pile that would enable us to go through slush very, very quickly with just a few number of people. And when Baen's Universe folded, because it was about 2 years ahead of the Kindle, if we'd been able to hold on for another 2 years, it would have been the first science fiction magazine on Kindle. But it didn't. It was a great try. The problem is that the authors would not go away. They refused to go away, and they kept sending us stories, and they were good, publishable quality stories. So we kept the crit group that we had set up for the Universe writers to write and post slush in, and we just let them keep doing that. And after a while, Eric and I looked at it and said, these are good enough that we ought to just start publishing 1 or 2 an issue. And so we have. We've even attracted some serious pros like Edward M. Lerner, who has a story in this issue. And we get some interesting new writers as well. These do not have to be stories about the 1632 universe. They can be about anything. And we've gotten some wonderful stories.
So it's quite it's an all-purpose science fiction magazine.
For all intents and purposes, it is, with the exception that we have a very large 1632 bent.
Yes, one would imagine. So how is this related to the 1632.org community? How does it fit in?
Well, 1632.org is the site of all the resources. News, author's guides, don't do this. We have tarred, feathered, and nailed this dead horse. Don't do it. And all kinds of things like that. We have a copy of what we call the grid, which is all of the people who came back in time with Grantville. And we have a number of other very useful things. The story search engine enables authors to type in a word string and get hits from everything that's ever been written, whether it's been published by Baen or it's been published by the Grantville Gazette or it's been published by Ring of Fire Press. It shows up, and we have a volunteer who keeps that up. It's almost always really current. And so we've done some interesting things with the idea of being a magazine, with the idea of being books. It helps. It actually helps that we have spies. Jackie happens to live in Mannington, West Virginia, which is the model for Grantville. And if we need to know how far is this building from the corner, she walks over and looks.
I haven't been called on to do that very often, but I've been really pleased that Bjorn has come and visited me a couple of times. I live on a very pleasant street in a pleasant town. I have wonderful neighbors, and I'm enjoying living in Mannington, and which I explained to people that Eric used to live in Morgantown, and there was a small town outside of Morgantown when he was living there in the late 70s that was called Granville. And so that's where he undoubtedly came up with the name Grantville. And there's also a Grantsville elsewhere in West Virginia. And then, but Granville, by the turn of the century, had turned into a big box store haven. And so he had to go looking for someplace else, and he drove down 250 and found Mannington. and I was walking the streets of Mannington on Google Earth back in around 2014, 2015, and I really liked what I saw. so anyway,
It's
I'll get out of
probably
one.
better now in the 21st century than it is in the 17th century, but who knows?
Well,
So
Well, the thing about living in West Virginia is there are a lot of great things about it as long as you've got an income. The problem, I remember when I moved to West Virginia, I always wondered, why would anybody in their right mind work in a coal mine? And I discovered why real quick. And within 2 months, I was trying to get a job in a coal mine because it was about the only job that paid well, you know. And my wife at the time, that was my first wife, she was the assistant, the executive assistant to the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at West Virginia University. It was right there in Morgantown, and got paid minimum wage. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, that's what you're dealing with. And but if you can deal with the financial side of it, there are a lot of really nice things about West Virginia. Really, our people are nice. I always like them a lot.
Yeah. Well, having a job is often a good way to go. Wherever you may live.
I worked all kinds of jobs when I was there. I worked machine shops. I wound up working in shape up in glass factories, driving a cab at night. I mean, you just pretty much do whatever you scrape up in order to make a living. It's not easy. It really isn't.
Yeah. Well, maybe they shouldn't have broken off from Virginia in the Civil War. Maybe they'd be better off if they
not hardly
stayed with the Confederacy.
But on the other hand,
Virginia, I've been there.
On the other hand, Tony, we would not have had the Hatfields and McCoys.
That's true.
Because one of them.
No, we probably would have. The thing you got to understand about Appalachia is there are plenty of parts of it. I mean, people think of Virginia, they think of Northern Virginia, the high scale. Yeah, you go down to Southwest Virginia, it's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, well, that's what I think about when I think about Virginia. I don't even believe that the Northern Virginia exists as part of this state. Anyway, as a son of Appalachia, I will defend it to. But
well, I'm coming to you from East Tennessee, so
it can be poor and stupid as well. And it's great that those people in Georgia finally learned how to read. They can catch up with us in Alabama. Well,
I was going to say in Alabama,
they're going to have to learn how to read now that the Justice Department has decided to intervene in the voting rights case.
Let's talk about the book.
I was going to say, let's stay out of politics.
Right. So this book has a definite tiger theme. I have noticed it. What the heck is that about? First of all, there's this Thomas Kidd cover, which you may notice is be this way. Yes, there is the philosopher Thomas Hobbes in a tiger outfit, which I believe is a Hobbes outfit. So maybe we could start out with talk about Eric's story, which is I was going to end on it though. Maybe we should end on that. Let's talk about Griff's story. Hunter, my huntress. Now this is away from Magdeburg and so what happens in the series is, for those that don't know, the town of Grantville, West Virginia, is thrown back in time into the middle of Germany in the 1600s, and during all of that tumult in Europe at the time. But now, that's 1632. Now we're a good ways ahead. I believe probably Griff's story take what, 1636 or 7 would
Yep.
be. It's
Yeah,
taking
36. Yeah.
and
So
it's in India, or it's concerning the characters that are become some of the main characters of 1636 Mission of the Mughals and 1637 the Peacock Throne, right?
Yep.
Dara and what's the woman's name? She's
Jahanara, his sister, his elder sister.
So
Jahanara.
tell us about this, and tell us what tigers have to do with it.
So the originally, this is only the second professional sale I'd made, I believe, and
So this is
originally
an old story.
Yeah.
Before you wrote the books, you wrote this story.
Yeah, this was actually kind of a proof of concept thing. Yeah, this is a proof of concept thing. What basically had happened was Christopher Weber had an excellent story with that occurs in Grantville or Magdeburg with an Afghan soldier, a fortune kind of thing, and a diplomat sent from the Mughals to Europe, and Christopher and I were initially going to try and write a novel with Eric concerning India, and he had provided that character Salim, and he kind of dropped out of it, and I was writing the India side, and he was going to write the seafaring side as they travel from Europe to India. And so these stories were going to be braided together and made into a novel. And what they ended up being was I wrote the first one, Hunter My Huntress, and the tiger has to do with it in that she is Nur Jahan, who turned out to be one of Eric's favorite villainesses in the cycle that we're doing right now.
Yeah, she's super smart and sneaky.
Yeah, and so she is having a conversation with Jahanara about trying to kind of illuminate for Jahanara that there's different ways of doing things, and I've seen it all and that kind of thing. And she's relating a story of a tiger hunt that she went on and with her husband and the emperor of the Mughal Empire, and how he said, well, if you're so good at it, shoot him. And she actually killed, and I know that in the modern context, this is a horrible, horrible thing. But at the time, they were seen as a real threat to farmers, livestock, everything. But she killed, in the actual historical record says that she killed 4 in one sitting. 4 Bengal tigers hunted in one shoot. And I was like, nobody will believe that, with a single shot arquebus, basically. So I kind of toned it down just a little bit, just went for 3. And while she's relating this story to her young, she's her niece, her grandniece, and her grandniece and her step granddaughter, because tangled webs are not just for West Virginia hillbillies, but also for Indian royal families. But yeah, so that was kind of the origin of that story, was trying to prove my chops to Eric and put that story together. It took about a year to do, and because a lot of research involved in trying to figure out what was going on in Mughal India at the time, but it was certainly not wasted, because I did that story, and I think 2 more or 3 more that were published by the Gazette after that, with the same characters. And with Christopher dropping out, I just I approached Eric and was talking to him. It's like, hey, I'll do this. And I'm sure there's some behind the scenes talking from both from Walt and Chuck Gannon and Paula Goodlet about what I was doing to kind of encourage Eric to take a look and see him in a positive light. I didn't actually know that they were going to be in Grantville Gazette 9 until recently. I think Walt told me, but I've had some busy stuff going on recently, so I've been losing track of things.
Well, tell us a little bit about the characters of Dara and Janara, and a little bit more about Noor as well, just to because they're sort of key elements in this sort of webwork of intermarried families that are also killing each other and fighting for power and all.
Yeah,
it's a fascinating era.
So the Mughals don't have primogeniture, so it's basically the empire is divided amongst the sons, technically, but usually it's they fight for it, and one of them wins, and the others. In the previous generation, Shah Jahan is Dara Shikoh, Aurangzeb, and Jahanara's father, and Nur Jahan is Shah Jahan's mother-in-law.
No,
yes,
no,
mother-in-law.
No, his stepmother.
His stepmother. Thank you. It's again.
No,
it's a bush, not a tree. So.
Well, and Noor was Emperor Jahangir's 20th and last wife.
Yes.
And was far and away the most influential and powerful. She was an incredible figure in Indian history. She's immensely powerful, even in coinage issued in her own name. One of the reasons I want to keep her around is, first of all, I think she's a great character, but the other thing I like about her, she's 60 years old. And books aren't as bad as movies, but they tend to have the same dynamic of, female characters tend to be, 40 or under. And I just like having this 60-year-old, hard-bitten, tough as nails woman who's been a mover and shaker in what was one of the 2 or 3 most powerful empires of the time, and did it all from the confines of the harem. Because she was under severe restrictions. But that didn't stop her from wielding a huge amount of power. There was one empress of the Ottoman Empire that was sort of like her. I can't remember her name, but she did the same kind of thing. She basically ran the Ottoman Empire for. Huh?
Roxolana.
Who was it?
Roxolana.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Anyway, that's partly what I like about Noor.
And it was fun to write her. I have her having hot flashes while she's working her way through her little coterie of spies and that kind of thing. So making her as human and three-dimensional as possible, given that these women were if otherwise it would be a terrible slog. If you were to just talk about the harem and how oppressive it was to women, which it was, but they were these people were people who had well-rounded personalities and were able to affect massive change and massively benefit their people. Jahanara built something on the order of 76 caravanserai, basically caravan stops, hostels along the caravan routes that her father had set up. So, and these were free. They were held at her expense to the people. So trade flourished under her. She was also a big trader. She donated enormous amounts of money to Mecca and Medina for the upkeep of the Kaaba. Just really impressive kind of resume. And then she was a huge poet. This is all just Jahanara. Nur Jahan was equally powerful and smart, and she developed they called it water silk that was worn by the harem and the rich people. She also developed a perfume, attar of roses, that was special and new. Just amazingly kind of well-rounded people, extremely well educated, spoke 3, 5 3 to 5 languages as a matter of course throughout the day. And just really kind of neat, impressive stuff.
Yeah, and also a
and
very
then,
good shot off the back of a horse.
yes.
Well, we actually, one of the things we tried to do, and I think successfully, is portray to people the reality of what an imperial harem is, because there's a lot of just stereotypes people have. It's just kind of, well, really good looking, semi-naked women. And there was some of that, especially given that climate. But we start the second novel, Peacock's Throne, with a polo game between different women of the harem. And when I say polo, I mean, the kind where you're on horseback smacking a mallet. And the thing about that, people tend to associate with English aristocracy. Yeah, well, it's a very rough, dangerous sport, as is anything involving being up on a horse. And they used to do that all the time, and hunt tigers. It's like, it's not really quite what people think. Anyway,
Yeah.
those books.
Yeah, so they are. So the short story in any case is kind of the introduction of here is all the stuff that's going on. And Jahanara is trying to conceal the fact that she has received via Salim, the conduit who actually went to Grantville and is coming back with a bunch of documents proving that Grantville is real. And because the emperor's, he had sent his envoy there basically to get rid of him, because the guy had lost the power play against him, against Shah Jahan. He had lost the power play there, and but he was too powerful to really just kind of execute. So he got rid of him. He said, why don't you go to find this fabled town that's appeared in Europe, and got rid of him that way. So Salim is returned, and he's returned with a bunch of documents, one of which is a postcard of the Taj Mahal. And spoiler alert, when Shah Jahan sees this, he believes that, yeah, this must be for real, that they were from the future. And there's a lot of mysticism involved in even in modern day India, but there was a lot of mysticism involved in even the practice of Islam at the time. So there was a lot of wiggle room for prophecies and those kind of things where, wow, this could really be what's going on. And that's how kind of Dara gets into it, is because he was much more multi-denominational, let's put it that way. He was very much a fan of his grandfather's way of doing things, which was everybody is neighbors. Everybody is, we're Shulim al-Kul, I think is the name of it. I'm probably mispronouncing it horribly. But it was, everyone is a neighbor, everyone is a friend under me. And the religious differences should not matter so much as the community that is the Mughal court and the Mughal Empire. So, which was, a radical concept, especially among Muslims, given that they're not big fans of coexisting either in that era or in the current era. And so it was a big shift that his grandfather had done. And Dara really bought into this. He was a big fan of it. He was, in the actual historical record, he was a bit of a, how should we put it? He was a bit gullible. He liked his mysticism and his wizards and stuff like that. But he tried to have a spell cast on an Afghan fortress that was resisting the empire, thinking that would be a successful way to get to have them open the gates and overcome the fortress that the Persians had taken. So,
Tony, I don't know if you know this, but Joy was the one who picked the first round of all the stories, and then I looked at it, and then Eric picked the last group that actually made it into the book.
So how do you sort through that enormous amount of stuff there's so many issues, Joy?
You go back to what's the real root of Ring of Fire. And some people know I have a very long background in psychological research as well as history. And when I looked at Ring of Fire, what I realized is what Eric had written was change. This is about change. How does change affect us? How do we affect change? How does it mess up our lives, basically? And so when I was looking at these stories, I was looking for stories that were not the big stories, because frankly, I don't really give a hoot about the big stories. You know, what's the king doing? What's the Pope doing? I don't care. I learned a long time ago from Connie Willis, the great Connie Willis, when I did an interview with her for Galaxy's Edge. And what she said is during times of change, people are still doing stuff. They're still getting married, having babies, selling stuff, buying stuff. All the things of life are still going on. So when I looked at the stories, I wanted to see the small stories, as Eric calls them, the stories that are about people and about small issues. Like I said, I didn't care about the kings. I mean, Eric and them can deal with that. I don't care. But the things like Jackie's story, which is just a marvelous story about how does one little piece of trivia change everything. And those are the kinds of stories that I really value. And that's what I look for, but besides really good writing, because we've got some marvelous writers in the universe.
Yeah, it's probably a bunch of stories that you wish you could have gotten in as well.
Oh, yeah, there were stories, but sometimes they'd say, no, we can't do that because there's a book coming out on that, or so I'm not really at release to talk about those. But I'm sure people will hear from those stories too, sooner or later. We've got a lot of stories to tell.
That was part one of a two-part discussion of Grantville Gazette 9. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization. But the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's league are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
We're still at an early enough stage, no one's come up with anything to call it yet. But basically, we'd amend both constitutions to grant reciprocal citizenship. Reciprocal citizenship? Anna repeated. In essence, any citizen of the Republic would be a citizen of the Star Empire, and any citizen of the Star Empire would be a citizen of the Republic. Where they voted and where they paid taxes would depend upon the Star Nation in which they currently resided. Elizabeth smiled as Honor's eyes widened. Oh, it'll be more complicated than that, I'm sure, but that's the basic platform we're after. We'll be looking at building deliberate economic ties as well. And of course, Havenite businesses and individuals will get the same junction rates as Manticorans do. As I say, I've talked about it with Benjamin a bit too. Grayson intends to stay independent, for reasons I fully understand. But he's inclined to think the Graysons may be ready for the same kind of relationship by the time Eloise and I actually have all the bits and pieces glued into place. Honor frowned in thought, then glanced at Hamish. There seemed to be a certain flicker of amusement deep in his blue eyes, but he only looked back with a solemn shrug. It sounds like it ought to be workable, she said to Elizabeth then. I'd be more confident if history wasn't littered with things that ought to have worked. But with a pair like you and Eloise driving it, I don't doubt the legal framework can at least be created and put into place. Making it actually work has a lot of potential to get complicated, though, I'd think. I agree, Elizabeth said with a chuckle. On the other hand, there are some things we can already put into place to help build the relationship we'll need when the time comes. In fact, I'd planned to discuss this with you sometime in the next few months. Did you? Honor said, and there was no mistaking the suspicion in her tone or her eyes this time as she sampled Elizabeth's mind glow. Well, I wasn't going to cram it at you, Elizabeth told her, but one of the most essential elements will be keeping our military establishments on the same page, especially with the alignment still out there somewhere. All trace of amusement faded from her eyes for a moment, and her nostrils flared. I know the hunt for the rest of your onion is really only just getting started, Honor, but I have to tell you, I'm not optimistic about our dragging them back into the open until they're damned well ready to come back out into the open. I'm not giving up hope, but I'm afraid that's what the odds favor, Honor agreed. Which is why we have to maintain a strong military posture. I don't see any way in hell we could maintain the fleet strength we have right now. There are megatons of totally valid domestic reasons to cut naval funding now that the League's not a threat, and we've pretty much established we can kick anybody's ass, Elizabeth said bluntly. Manticore has enough of a naval tradition and enough interstellar commitments that maintaining a powerful fleet won't be that great a challenge. Maintaining one as powerful as the one we have now is likely to be impossible, though. We'll keep a couple hundred capital ships in commission. A lot of the others can go into reserve, and unlike the Sollies, we will rotate ships in and out to keep them up to date. But we're going to need a lot more cruisers and battle cruisers than STPs in our post-war fleet. And Haven's Navy will probably be under even more pressure to retrench. Partly, I'm afraid, because the Havenite Navy acquired a lot of negative associations under the legislaturalists that the Royal Navy's never had to deal with. Honor nodded again. She'd considered those points herself more than once. So what Eloise and I plan to do is find every way we can to weld the RMN and RHN together at the hip. Elizabeth smiled thinly. For one thing, we're shipping all the Solarian data you brought home from Ganymede to Bolthole, and we intend to establish a permanent joint R&D facility there. Honor's eyes flared in true astonishment, and Elizabeth's smile grew warmer. Apparently, Admiral Hemphill and Admiral Foraker have taken a genuine liking to one another. The Empress shook her head. Eloise tells me Tom Theismann's taken to referring to them as a Congress of Geeks. She chuckled. I think he means it as a compliment. I am pretty sure he does, Honor said. But, Lord, I don't know if the galaxy's ready to have both of them working together permanently, Elizabeth. With tree cats thrown into the mix, too, Elizabeth said with a louder chuckle. Don't forget that. Honor shook her head, and Elizabeth grinned at her. Anyway, what we're hoping is that our research establishments will cross-fertilize, and we can create a commonality of weapons clear across the board. And, of course, strategic and tactical doctrine to go with it. I expect that'll require at least as much work as the hardware side. Honor nodded yet again, and Elizabeth shrugged. One thing we're planning on is to operate permanently integrated Manticoran and Havenite formations in areas which are clearly of vital interest to us both. There'll be plenty of opportunity to cycle up-and-coming commanders through those sorts of slots. And we're also thinking about modifying our academy's curricula so that our midshipmen and their officer cadets each spend 1 full year in the other's academy. Honor's eyes widened with respect for that notion, but then she frowned. All that sounds wonderful, Elizabeth. And I'm pretty sure our current crop of senior officers could make it work, at least at the macro level. Mike and Lester, for example, or Longley and Alice. But it's going to tend to fly apart at what I think of as the micro level, the training level, the level where logistics officers and yard dogs get to stick their oars in, or the level where people who feel their unspeakable talents were underrecognized when someone like that hack Torville got the choice assignment and all the glory, can do their best to pour sand into the gears. That's one of the things I worry about on the political side, but that's not my real forte. The military side, though? She shook her head. Tom can probably handle it from his side, at least as long as Eloise is in office, but we've got plenty of arrogant, chauvinistic Manticorans who'll require a little attitude adjustment from time to time while all this is getting set up. Once it's up and running, maybe not, but in the early stages? She rolled her eyes. Then she stopped, and those eyes narrowed as she tasted Elizabeth's mind glow. "Oh, no," she said sharply. "Don't even think about it, Elizabeth." "Well, I wasn't going to bring it up," the Empress said, "but since you have, there's really only—" "I said no, and I meant no," Honor said flatly. "I'm done, Elizabeth. I told you that." "I know you did," Elizabeth said in a softer voice. "Well, I damned well meant it," Honor said. She tucked her right arm around Catherine and reached out her left to take Hamish's hand. "I've been on active duty since the day I graduated from Saganami Island, and since Basilisk, I've been on active operations without any real break, aside from the time I spent on medical leave or hauled off to Cerberus. Oh, and I'll give you the time I spent on the beach after the duel, or during the High Ridge fiasco, although I wouldn't exactly call either of those restful. But that's 43 years, Elizabeth. 43! And I have a family, and I'm going to spend time with that family." Her eyes burned, her hand tightened on Hamish's, and she realized her lips wanted to quiver. She blinked back tears and looked quickly at him, tasting his support, feeling his love, then turned back to Elizabeth. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," she said softly. "I know how badly you think you need me. I can taste it. But I've given everything I've got. I'm tired. And Hamish and I went to Briarwood last week for Dr. Ilescu to implant the zygote, Emily's zygote. The day I told her about Beowulf, the day she died, that was the day it was fertilized." She shook her head fiercely. "And I know now, Mom," she said, turning to her mother, "why you said I'd understand why you carried me to term when it was my turn. I didn't have that with Raoul, but I'll have it with this child, with Emily's child. And when this child is born, my children and hers will have a mother." She turned back to Elizabeth. "So, I'm sorry, Elizabeth," she repeated, her eyes misty. "But there are some things in this universe that are more important, and I am finally going to give the people I love the time they deserve. Emily taught me that, and I'm going to do it." There was silence for a long moment, and then Elizabeth Winton reached out and laid one gentle hand on Honor Alexander Harrington's knee. "Of course you are," she said softly. "Your Majesty," Prime Minister Grantville said with unaccustomed formality some hours later, "I don't think—" "Don't go there, Willie," Elizabeth said with an off-center smile. Honor and Hamish and their entire family, two legs and tree cats alike, had departed 20 minutes ago after a private dinner with the royal family. There weren't that many people Elizabeth Winton could invite over for dinner without its turning into a state occasion or a political horse-trading session, and she deeply treasured the people with whom she could do that. She didn't need Honor's ability to taste other people's emotions to know Grantville had simply been biding his time, though. Now she faced him squarely, and he gave her one of those stubborn Alexander looks. "Your Majesty, I understand what she's saying, and God knows I love her. For that matter, there's nobody in the Star Empire who has a better understanding of how much she's already given, how much she's already sacrificed. But we need her. We need her as the first Space Lord everyone would respect. Not even the most chauvinistic Havenite officer in the universe would dare to disrespect her, and I can't even imagine a Manticoran officer with a testosterone level to argue with her. We have to make this military partnership work, and without her— First, Willie," Elizabeth interrupted firmly, "nobody is truly irreplaceable. Do I agree with you that she would be the absolutely ideal first Space Lord? Of course I do. The only slot she'd be more valuable in would be First Lord, but I sort of think we'll be leaving Hamish in that one for a while. So yes, I would really, really like to see First Space Lord Harrington working with First Lord Whitehaven and Secretary of War Theismann and C&O Longley or Torville to make this work. You cannot imagine how much I would like to see that. But second, she's absolutely right about how much she's already given, how much her service to the Star Kingdom and the Star Empire's already cost her. I don't think I could even count the number of times she's almost been killed, and the list of people she cared about who have been killed would be enough to give me nightmares if I knew all the names on it. She's lost virtually all of her family on Sphinx. God only knows how many cousins she lost in the Beowulf strike, and now she's lost Emily. And I owe her. I owe her. Me, personally, Elizabeth Winton, not just Queen Elizabeth or Empress Elizabeth. That woman has put herself through hell for me over and over again, and so this time, Willie, this time, I have her back for a change. I don't really give a damn how badly we think we need her. You leave her be. That's a direct royal command, and you make sure everyone else leaves her be, because I will be the worst nightmare of anyone who doesn't. And, just to be sure we're perfectly clear about this, that means you, too. And I don't care if you are her brother-in-law. Do you read me on this? Grantville looked at her for a moment, but then he sighed. You're right, he said. I just can't not want to see her where we need her so badly. That's because you're a prime minister, she told him with a crooked smile. Now, go home, both of you. She reached out to give Tree Master a quick ear rub where he sat on Grantville's shoulder. And get a good night's rest, because tomorrow, while she and Hamish are out at Whitehaven packing for Grayson, you and I are going to be thinking about who we'll grab for First Space Lord since we can't have her. Got it? Got it, Your Majesty, he said ruefully, and gave the Prince Consort a slight bow. Good night, Your Highness, he said, and to you as well, Your Majesty. Good night, Willie, Elizabeth said affectionately and walked him to the door. It closed behind him, and Elizabeth tucked her arm through Justin's elbow and led him out onto one of King Michael's Tower's balconies. They settled on a chaise lounge, and she leaned back, resting her head on his chest with a sigh of deep content, as Ariel and Monroe draped themselves on perches. I've got to say, Beth, Justin said, I really didn't expect you to give up that easily. I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but I really, really didn't expect you to let her go without more of a fight. Really? She rolled her head, smiling at him in the moonlight. What makes you think I gave up on anything? His eyes narrowed, and he frowned down at her. But you just said... I said she was right, and I said she deserves to be left in peace. And I said I'd protect her from everyone else. Elizabeth's smile softened, and something like sorrow floated in her eyes. And I will. And it won't matter, not in the end. What do you mean? He asked. Why won't it matter? Because I'll need her, Elizabeth said almost inaudibly. I'll need her. And when I do, I'll get her back. Elizabeth, you're a queen, an empress, he said gently, hugging her tight. I know you care about her, but it's your job, your duty, to put the people you have to have in the places where you have to have them, whatever it costs them. Whatever it costs you. Of course it is. She looked up at him again. But I'm not the one who's going to make her come back. Make her put herself on the line again. He frowned in confusion, and Elizabeth reached up to touch the side of his face. I can, and I by God will protect her from everyone in the damned galaxy, she said fiercely. But there's one person I can't protect her from. Elizabeth shook her head, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's the hell of it, Justin. I can't protect her from herself. I'll need her, and she'll know it, and that will be all it takes, all in the world. Not because I try to force her into it, but because of who she is. She arched her neck, raising her head to kiss him, and then settled back once again, her eyes closed. Because she's Honor Harrington, the Empress of Manticore said softly. Because she's Honor Harrington.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a large cage of time-traveling tigers to loose upon unsuspecting historical malefactors, plus praise and gratitude for Eric Flint, Walt Boyes, Joy Ward, Griffin Barber, and Jackie Britton Lopatin, editor and authors of Grantville Gazette 9. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.